What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Enthusiasm is Our Jam podcast. I'm your host, Kyler Olson, and in this episode, I'm also writing solo. I also apologize for the lack of background going on in my videos. It is kind of a work in progress. I started this podcast just a few months ago, and wasn't really sure where to go with it with audio, but now we're going to try out some video via Microsoft Teams. I'm going to have a few guests on via Microsoft Teams. So we're working on a background. We're working on kind of a location that's good with sound, that sort of thing. But today I'm actually going to pose a very intriguing question to all of our listeners, and I would love to hear any and all thoughts, perspectives, and opinions from any of our listeners. So please feel free to respond to this question via comment on Facebook Messenger, comment on Instagram, or you can even comment on this video on YouTube, as I'm going to start recording episodes like this to gain more interaction with our listeners and our audience on YouTube. The reason for the title of this podcast is because of my Instagram educator page, which is called Enthusiasm is Our Jam. So if you do have an Instagram page, that is also where you can find all of these episodes and certainly respond to this post when this podcast episode is featured on Instagram, usually on Mondays. So as I inch closer to asking this particular question, this isn't necessarily a question that I just randomly made up. I graduated with my master's in curriculum, instruction, and assessment in the spring of 2022, and this question directly relates to what I completed my final research analysis capstone project on. I'm going to skim through some of the key points as well as share my own personal views, but as I said, I encourage you as the listener to also chime in with any thoughts that you have via any means of communication on social media. Now, the question I'm posing in this episode is, are behavior rewards effective? This is a very loaded question in education. That is, has all sorts of answers. Whether you teach elementary, middle, or high school, and regardless of whether or not you teach in the general education classroom or elsewhere, your opinion and perspective will likely differ, but that's yet another reason that I want to hear from you as the listener. Before I get into any focused questions or key points and thoughts of my own, a big thing I'd also like to highlight is that I teach elementary school. I've taught both 4th and 5th grade. That, of course, will certainly factor into my own thoughts and opinions regarding behavior rewards and their effectiveness. I know that my standpoint and perspective may be a little different than that of a middle school or high school teacher or any other grade levels. I don't think this pertains much to higher education and university level, but maybe it does in some form or fashion. So again, please feel free to reach out. But this is all simply due to the grade level and age of your students in your classroom and in your school. But that is yet another reason that I want to hear from you. So as I said, my research project when I completed my master's was focused on whether or not behavior rewards are effective or not. There is a movement beginning to take place in the United States of schools deciding to completely eliminate their behavior reward system. Yes, I said schools are starting to eliminate their behavior reward system, and it's working. So some people, especially I'm sure administrators, might quickly jump to the question of, well, what replaces it? And that's a very good question to start with. Many schools actually take a look at their demographics while others reflect on their school's culture and climate to kind of think about and reflect on whether their system is working or not. So some food for thought and things I'm not going to dive too deep into, but kind of skim the surface of just to get our thoughts on this topic going. The questions I posed in my research were, number one, what tangible or intangible items are students motivated to earn? In our school, we are called the Lincoln Lightning. So our behavior rewards involve bolts and sparks. And sparks also lead to what we call the storm cloud, which is mostly used for our younger kids in K1-2. I don't believe our 3rd graders do, but maybe they do. I've taught 4th and 5th, so I'm not totally sure if it does. I believe it's just K1-2 though. So our bolts, which I'll talk about later, are for our above and beyond behaviors, while our sparks are more so for the little tiny things that kids do right. that are very common to see in our school because they're smaller acts of kindness that just happen throughout the day. And I also want to bring up, I have been teaching middle school math at I shouldn't say the local because there are several middle schools in our district, but I am teaching middle school math at a local middle school, actually the one that our elementary school that I work at feeds into when our students go from 5th to 6th grade. But as I was making some copies for summer school the other day, I noticed a table in the corner of the copy machine room with a bunch of just random goodies like Jolly Ranchers, Gatorades, and all sorts of just little things. And one of the middle school teachers said that that was sort of their prize room for kids who do their job. They're always on time to class. They're never tardy for class. They always get their homework done, all their work done on time, that sort of thing. So that was kind of opened my eyes to what the middle school kids are offered or what they have access to if they're able to do their job. So moving on, number 2, does the power of choice impact a reward system? The first thing I think about now, as I did this paper a year or two ago, the first thing I think about now is what I've used in my classroom this past year. I actually started using what we call the wow board, which I stole from a teacher on Instagram. But we used it a lot this year because it promoted a lot of choice. As I just said, does the power of choice have an impact on a reward system? In my perspective, it certainly does. So our wow board, as I've talked about in previous podcast episodes, is a 10 by 10 grid, and it's just myself noticing students getting their stuff done or being prepared or being where they need to be. And it's simply, Johnny, I love whatever, just pointing out random things. Thank you for being ready. You can go put your name on the wall board. And I just have it over on the side of our whiteboard with some expo markers right beneath it. So all kids have to do is walk over, put their name up, and it's a done deal. So when all 100 of those boxes are filled in, and once again, this is just in my classroom, I think another teacher or two in our building use it because I kind of influenced and inspired them to use it. But this is not a school-wide thing. It is something that we've used in our classroom because it has worked in our classroom. So when all 100 of those are filled in, we spin a wheel to find out who gets selected. I usually do 5 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon until I get up to about 30 throughout the course of a few days. But the power of choice. Kids are offered, if they get their name selected, they can pick the playlist in our classroom for the day because I play a lot of music in my classroom. There's all sorts of things that they can do. They can pick a game to play for the class. But again, the power of choice. There are about 5 or 6 choices that I offer them, and I'd say 2 or 3 are very desirable, while the other 2 kind of get pushed to the back seat because the first 3 are a very big one, or very big ones for our students. But that is kind of where my mind goes now with the power of choice, and I do think it certainly has a large impact on a reward system, especially depending on what grade level you have. Number 3, what are the benefits of eliminating school-wide behavior rewards? As I talked about to start this episode, there are schools that are moving to eliminating their behavior reward system. And as I said, the number one question I'm sure that comes up with educators is what takes its place. One of the articles I did read on a school that decided to do this started moving to character training or character building and working on the person as a whole. Certainly not connected to academics, but just focusing on who you are as a person, what kind of choices you make in certain situations. As a teacher, I'm sure it's a little easier to make good choices if you are focused on one situation and you aren't in a conflict with somebody. So again, different benefits on how you pose it, different benefits on the system you implement in place of it, all sorts of stuff like that. But what are the benefits of that? I would be very intrigued to sit down with teachers from any of these schools that are deciding to eliminate, because I think it's a very interesting and potentially successful idea. Some other pieces of this topic that I won't go into too much detail that I did discuss in this project were the impact that these rewards have on special education students, so special education teachers and possibly some instructional aides out there that work with these students on a daily basis. How do behavior rewards affect or impact them throughout the school day? What does exclusion from the classroom look like, and how does that relate to behavior rewards? The effect it has on office referrals. I'm a teacher that doesn't send a lot of kids to the office unless something horrible happened at recess or at lunch. Then there's certain situations where I definitely want my administrators to be present, and I definitely want my students to be aware that my administrators are present in certain situations. But other than that, I can't really remember sending a kid to the office for behavior. And that's not to say I have everything figured out. That's just not how I am. I'm a big conversation type of teacher based on how I do relationships in my classroom, which is a whole nother discussion. And then the fourth one is schools using the house system. We do have a few schools in our district that use the house system. We have one school that their whole school revolves around the house system. They actually get title money each year to, or I should say they use a lot of their title money in order to use the house system because it has had an impact based on their demographics of where they are in town. It has had a very large impact on their students, especially their young male students, in the decision making that they have throughout the school day. I do know several teachers that work at that school, and their Fridays actually revolve around the house system and celebrating those students who are able to make those choices. We have had the house system in our 5th grade at Lincoln Elementary. I won't say that we use it all that effectively this year because we had 5 teachers, including myself, who had never taught 5th grade before. So while we were trying to learn how to teach 5th grade and kind of working on getting them ready for the middle school years ahead, the house system definitely took a back seat a lot more than we probably would have liked to. We certainly had a calendar, but having 5 teachers at the same time, our schedules are all slightly different. I think having 4 teachers might be a little easier with the even number of people. But I will say that we were kind of building the plane as we were trying to fly it in a sense. So I could definitely see the house system working if you have the system to do it. So going back to our school with our own rewards system, and there are different aspects of this that I love. There are different aspects that I probably don't have as much buy-in. I'm sure primary teachers, our K1 teachers, have a lot more invested in this. When I did this project, I actually sat down with my own students, and this is when they were 4th graders, and we talked about their desires, what they are encouraged or what they pride themselves in earning. And a good 50% to probably 60% of my students really didn't have a desire for these because they kind of voice themselves that they just act the way they do because that's how you're supposed to act. And I know that can be more of a 5th and 6th grade thing, or a 4th and 5th, sorry. And our K1-2 students are probably not going to find many students that would say that personally. But that sometimes has an effect because if a behavior award isn't going to change the behavior or impact it, then there's a lot of perspective that can go into that. But I also tell my students from day one that we just have expectations, and I expect you to be a good human regardless of whether it involves a trophy, a ribbon, or a prize at the end. So that is something I preach from day one, and my students are fully aware of that. But anyways, at our school, we are the Lincoln Lightning. As I mentioned, we have bolts and sparks that are connected to our school mascot. Bolts are recognized by staff towards students. And I will also mention on that note that I've also had students write bolts for other students, some of which didn't have certain school supplies someday. Maybe they shared a snack. I rarely don't allow students to give because I love when students recognize students for those types of things because it also encourages that behavior. So students who earn these bolts, which is basically a white slip of paper about that big, and I only size it up because we also have blue sparks that are smaller slips of paper. They have our Lincoln Lightning logo on it, and those are for smaller acts of kindness. Aside from positive behaviors and just doing the right things, I've also given out sparks to students, the little blue slips, to students who may struggle giving effort in class, which is never something I would have thought I would be doing as a teacher. But in the past 2 or 3 years, I've had a student or two who some days they just need a little extra encouragement just to get their stuff done. And it certainly does not happen often. That is not something I pride myself in doing, is rewarding kids for effort, but some kids just need a little extra kick in the butt, a little a little extra incentive just to get their day going. So my classroom, I also should mention, is also has been surrounded by first grade classrooms the past 2 school years. So I've actually handed out a lot of sparks to first graders who walk nicely in the hallway. They're not spinning in circles. They're not backpedaling. They're not shuffling and running into lockers, and they're not pushing all of their classmates. As you might imagine, first graders are always on cloud nine when the cool boy teacher gives them sparks. So I certainly take advantage of that. So as I was going through this research, I'm sure some people are waiting to hear the results from this. I know when I started this research, I informed my admin that this is what I was focusing on. Not necessarily because they needed to know about it, but because I was really looking forward to what these results and what kind of conclusion I would find. The overall results of this research concluded with rather simple and maybe a little boring results. Personally, I don't even say that because I was disappointed. Excuse me. I was actually quite pleased by it because the results involve little simple things that just require consistency and buy-in from your entire school. Now, buy-in from your entire school is a lot easier said than done. Sitting here saying, well, you just need buy-in from all of your staff members, because it's not just your staff members, your kitchen staff, your custodians, your janitors, everyone in your school, whether they work there 1 day a week or 5 days a week, should feel the authority or feel the need or have the ability and know they have the ability without hesitation to recognize these behaviors themselves. Because when you have staff buy-in, that leads to student buy-in, which overall makes your system or helps to make your system successful. So I return to the words school culture and school climate. And I'm also a big sports person. I'm a coach in football and baseball, and culture and climate mean a big deal to me, especially with the people you have involved, because of course the people you have involved completely make up your school or team culture and your school or team climate. Aside from this, not only staff buy-in, but is your system consistent? And I can't sit here and say that I'm very consistent with behavior awards. I kind of get sucked into the school year with everything that teachers are required to do. As I mentioned, our students who earn bolts are recognized at school assemblies, which is another reason, gives them another kind of incentive to earn the bolt, is because they get recognized in front of the whole school at once. During the COVID era, we would have school assemblies online via Microsoft Teams so that we all were in our classrooms and not all bunched together. And it was definitely a reminder to me several times that I didn't necessarily need to start handing out more bolts, but it was a reminder to me that they still existed and I should still be recognizing students for certain things that they should be recognized for. So I cannot sit here and say that I am very consistent with it because I'm not. But consistency is a key in so many things we do in our schools. Regardless, behavior management, classroom management, you have to be consistent because students also notice when you're not consistent, and some of them will take advantage of that, as we as educators fully know that. So, like I said, behavior awards in my classroom from the first 2 weeks of school, my students are well aware. I don't have a list of qualifications. I don't tell them what they have to do to get a bolt or a spark, but they know that there are certain things in life that you should do just because you're a human being, just to be kind to others, whether that's holding open a door for somebody walking in the building, whether that's how you respond to people, anything like that. But as anybody who knows me as a teacher, and really so many teachers out there everywhere, relationships feed into any of this. And briefly, I will kind of flip the script here and go from positive behaviors to negative behaviors. So how can we kind of feed away and prevent those negative behaviors and turn them towards positive behaviors? Relationships, of course, feed into that a whole lot. I saw a tweet a few weeks ago. I'm big on Twitter. It's kind of how I get my news. It's kind of how I interact with a lot of people on social media. But there is one post asking how you have learned to manage negative behaviors more in your classroom. And I simply responded, having conversations rather than having confrontations. Actually, a lot of people liked it. But again, it's simple. It's to the point. It's sometimes easier said than done, especially depending on what times or time periods of the school year. Sometimes we get a little short fuse towards the end because we're kind of over it with the school year, which again, kind of sometimes we struggle with sitting down and having a conversation versus confrontation. But having those conversations and having those relationships directly feed into how those conversations go. Because if you have a strong relationship with any student in your classroom, and I will for sure say that I have stronger relationships with certain kids that I might connect to, and I wouldn't really even say that, because I still have students I pride myself in as a teacher to notice the students who don't get noticed, which is a lot of quiet students. So that's probably another reason I don't have a lot of negative things going on in my classroom, because my students trust me. But those relationships, when you have those relationships with your students, makes those conflicts and negative and tough conversations that much easier, because they know you and they trust you. And a quote that I still remember from the first week of school that I ever had in my first year teaching: kids don't care about what you know until they know that you care. And if they know that from the first day or the first week, those tough conversations with negative behavior that you want to turn into positive behavior are so much easier when you not only have a relationship with that student, but you know who they are as a person and how they are as a person. So a lot of things, of course, go into this topic. I hope my perspective helped a little bit, but I, of course, want to hear from all of you. And I know there's so many elementary school teachers, middle school, high school. Like I said, I don't think this pertains too much to higher education, because they're all, I guess we call them adults at that point. I don't really want to connect a certain age. Like when they get over 18, they all have it figured out and we don't have to worry about this anymore. But maybe it does pertain somewhat to higher education in a sense. But once again, the question I am posing, that I would love to hear any thoughts, any opinions, anyone who's ever had thoughts on this, and maybe your opinion changed. I think when I began this research, I didn't really know what to expect, because I didn't know if I was going to find this extravagant results or these extravagant conclusions. And like I said, it's really comes down to your school culture, your school climate. Do you have staff buy-in? Is your system consistent? All of that feeds into that. Like I said, your staff buy-in feeds right into your student buy-in, which creates your school culture and creates your school climate. I always think of school climate of, how do kids feel in school? Do they want to be there? I always want my students to want to be there. That's why I pride myself in finding those kids and knowing those kids who don't have as many interactions, or maybe don't have a very good family life and don't get a lot of attention at home. Sometimes those are loudest kids, because they come to school and they unload every social aspect they have. Or sometimes they come to school and they're still shy. But I definitely pride myself, and I know I've said it multiple times in the last 5 minutes, but I definitely take great pride as a teacher in forming relationships with those students who go unnoticed by so many people. So once again, the question is, are behavior awards effective? And regardless of whether you're in the general education classroom, whether you're a specialist, whether you're a special ed, anybody with educator or coach next to your title, I would say the general public, this might be a question you can answer, but I would say it's probably tougher if you've never been in or taught or worked in a school setting or a classroom setting. You can certainly voice your opinion. I would love to hear from anybody who has thoughts or opinions. But like I said, maybe you started your teaching career a few years ago and you had this very strong opinion of, I don't like rewards, or I do love rewards and I give them out so often. And maybe you swayed depending on certain experience or a certain student or a certain class of students that you had. So regardless, whether it was your experience, whether your opinion on it has never changed, or whether it has, I would love to hear from our audience, our viewers, our listeners. Once again, you can find me at Kyler Olson on Facebook, Facebook Messenger. Comment on this on Instagram. You can find us on Instagram at Enthusiasm is Our Jam, just like the podcast title. Or you can find us in the YouTube comments. Let me know your thoughts. Are behavior awards effective, and what do you think feeds into their effectiveness, or their ineffectiveness? This has been the Enthusiasm is Our Jam podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.